Alrighty, so for those of you that have chosen to use CodeSpace for your development environment, I'm going to walk you through basically the version, where the students who are doing local, you're going to do this out on the cloud. And honestly, it's going to be a bit quicker, but I've talked about at this point the benefits and the drawbacks of using something like CodeSpace, so just keep that in mind. So just as a refresher, right? So here we are. On premises would be your local, whatever you're using, and in cloud would be somewhere out there in that amazing cloud and not really knowing where it's at, but being able to use it. So for this purpose, you've selected, or at least you're watching the video to see how to set up code spaces, okay? All right, so for this part, we're going to, and I've given a link here because I think knowing a bit about what CodeSpaces is, but it's basically a free service offered, well, free in the sense because we're in education, we get it for free. If you are a commercial entity, it wouldn't be. But I've provided a link here to the documentation. And the thing I would say to you is I've been using CodeSpaces now for the whole summer that I've developed, the course development I've done this summer. And for the most part, it's been rock solid. I have had a couple of hiccups, and I'll just kind of walk you through some of the troubleshooting I did to get around them. Eventually, hopefully, actually, I hope you don't run into it. But there also is a limit for how many hours per month we get as a GitHub organization. So that's part of why I will show you about good, I would say, etiquette when running these code spaces in order to try to minimize the amount of time that it's hanging out there. And I don't say that to discourage its use, right? I just tell you that. And this will be something you'll hear me talking about through attendance as well, because it'll be interesting to see how many students choose this path. Okay, so for this, you want to be, and I set up just a demo private repo on our GitHub organization. So you would have had to have done the pre-work to get to this place. And if you're here, you will only, and actually only here, do you actually have this green button called Code. And so if you click on this, you will see that there's two tabs, local, which is hopefully clearly at this point about setting up locally, and now we have code spaces. So for this option, you're going to choose a code space, okay? And what you're going to do is you're going to create this code space on the main. So now what is a code space? I've talked a little about this in the week one, but it's basically a virtualized system that is, we call it spun up for you to actually do coding in the cloud, and then use version control, which is, by the way, the next item along this process that you will learn, how to move that code, or in this case, push that code from your code space to GitHub. Now, I say that because sometimes, based on the way you have it set up, they can look the same. Like right now, we're inside of GitHub, right? And you've already seen, based on the first one, how you can actually edit and create files. And you might think, well, why don't I just do it here? And the answer is because you don't have the actual editor to make your life easier. And it's just part of this class, is the other thing I would say to you. All right, so coming back here. So what we're going to do is go ahead, and there's the link actually I gave you in the write-up as well, and we'll go ahead and say create code space. So what this is doing, again, it's spinning up a URL. In this case, a URL that represents some kind of space that is made available to you by the GitHub organization, and specifically in this case Microsoft. And what it's doing now is it's just getting that ready. You can see this and let me make this a little bigger so you can see this. And actually, it's already stopped. But there's a little, still bringing it in. It's a little line when you first come into this, right? And it's setting up just some standard stuff. For one thing, it provides you a terminal, okay? It actually provides you a funny name, right? And so, by the way, that name is actually listed over here. So I'm just going to leave this as it is, go back to GitHub. And this is why I probably was telling you, like, sometimes it gets a little confusing, like am I in GitHub or am I in CodeSpace? And so if you look at the URL and you kind of look around, you start to realize the more you work with it, the difference. But one of the things, and this is actually based on my previous settings, and I'm going to just go in and show you this. You come into Manage, Themes, and I'm going to go to Color Picker. So for this demo, I'm actually going to do light. And the reason I'm doing that is to highlight the difference between what is the code space and what is GitHub. Because from this point forward, all the work you should be doing will either be locally or in your case on your code space. Okay. All right, so here we are. Again, you can choose different colors. It's really up to you how you want to set this up. But I was showing you that it creates a unique name, and this URL, I believe you can just, you could save this URL and have it directly accessed later, or if you, once you close it out, which I will show you how in a minute, then you can come back to your repo on GitHub, come back here, and what will happen now, I actually have to refresh in order for that to show up, is you will see the name of that. And a couple of things you notice here is when you're looking at it, it's active, which kind of makes sense, right? We have it in the other tab. No changes, which I'll talk about as we a little bit here, but it will also be for you the next item that you'll see as far as how to make changes to this environment. And then you have another option here. I'm going to scroll down, okay? A couple things. So as you're changing here, you do want to, and it's probably a little early, but I'll go ahead and show you this, is don't change the machine type. That's standard if you wanted to stop it. Now, here's what stopping means. Stopping, just like on a computer, if you shut the lid like on a laptop, right? Because this is set up to auto-save your files. And what I mean by that is, I think edit here, is it on file? Yeah, it's set to autosave. So what that means is anything you change here automatically gets saved. Now, that is not actually making it available on GitHub, which is the next item that you'll learn in this class. But I wanted you to see that as soon as you make changes here, and let's just make a minor one, right? Let's come down here. And let's just, and then, by the way, you don't have to do this. This is not required more than anything. Right? Like I could say my code space, right? And now what happens here is a couple things, and this is something you'll get used to. There's a little one over here that basically is and this says what it is. It's source control. Now we're using Git as our source control because when you're coding, you want to have tracking the changes of your code. Specifically for you, and then especially if you're working in a team. Now in a case like a class like this, you're mostly working in your own. You may be getting help though, so there's other benefits actually to using CodeSpace, I can imagine. But regardless, this shows you have a change. But let me also show you now, if I go back here and go back to, let's actually refresh again, because now I'm curious. It might not actually show. Yeah, so in this case now that on GitHub, looking at here, it shows I have uncommitted changes. So it actually is reflecting what's actively happening over in this space, okay? So I want you to know that. And again, you see me highlighting the difference between GitHub and the code space, because basically it took the repo, it created a virtual workstation, in this case from their servers, and then it linked. It didn't necessarily copy. It actually has a local to it system, but there is a direct connection to GitHub, okay? All right, so now that hopefully you're on board a little bit, we also get a terminal. Terminal is going to be very important in the next assignment. So, and it's actually using what's called bash. So if you happen to ever go look, you'll notice that bash is something that's a type of terminal that we're using, the commands that we're going to be doing. There are other types of terminals you can use, but for the most part in a class like this, you'll just be using bash. Okay, and if you ever close this, which you will need in the next assignment, right, there is a way to come here and you can actually go terminal, new terminal. You can also learn the keyboard shortcuts, which I like to do whenever I remember to have them, and that gives me that terminal back. Okay, all right, so having said this, right, and now started up code spaces, right, one thing I want to see, because I noticed this in mine, is there's something called extensions. Now you're going to learn about extensions in a little bit, especially as we get to kind of doing our first code. And I'm curious now that I've set up a new code space. What this list is, it lists the popular ones, the recommended ones, the code space, the browser, and what's installed. Right now there's nothing installed. And so one thing I noticed is that I, on another one, needed to have, and let me just see if this is code space is in here. Oop. Okay, good. Is it? And now what you notice on these extensions, looks like it's done by default now, which is good. That's actually something I hadn't seen before. So in this case, this is an extension, but I believe it's hard to see if it was. Let's see here. Looks like it was done by default. So, but you're going to learn more about extensions. Matter of fact, the one you're going to learn about on the first assignment, Who's in the House, is something called Live Server. When I talk about that, because when I did that assignment, it was before I was using code spaces. But what's cool is that that extension is also available here. But I will probably have a short video just showing those differences. Okay, so that's this extensions. And then this is a version, so it shows you I've made one change right here. And if you clicked on here, this is something you start to learn. It's like, okay, here's what it was originally, and here's what it is now. Right? So that shows you those differences. And that's the importance that as you work through a class like this is knowing not necessarily how to look at this, but how to track your changes. Okay. All right, so let's say you were working for a while and you were like, you know what, I'm going to walk away, I'm going to do something. And it's so normal to want to just leave things. And remember, if I didn't say this before, this will stay active, I don't think I did, for 30 minutes, okay? And what happens is that 30 minutes counts against all of our time collectively in the course. So it's just good hygiene if you know you're going to, and sometimes we step away and we think it's only for a few minutes, it turns out to be longer. I'm not saying if you do this it's wrong, but I'm just going to show you a way that, let's say you were stepping away and you wanted to actually say, you know what, I'm going to come back to this later, okay? And there's a couple things. You could come down here to the very bottom, click the code space, and then you should see this stop current code space, okay? If we do that, then what will happen is it will spin down your version here, but what will happen is it'll save, at least now, because of that auto save feature that I was showing you before. It saves that. It's just basically like saving things to the hard drive in a sense, but you're going to end up learning a different system called version control, where you will then have those changes go to GitHub. That's something you'll learn about next. But let's go ahead and for my demo and show how to stop that code space. And so now I get this message stopping the code space, and it takes it a few minutes. Notice this little indicator on the bottom. It's kind of like what was happening up here, and then it takes it a second, and then what will happen is once it's stopped, then, as a matter of fact, I'm going to grab that URL because now I'm curious if I can just go to that URL, and what I did is I grabbed it here. So I'm going to go ahead and close this tab, okay? I'm going to come back over here, because the other way is, let's say you come back later, right? I'm going to come back here, and I see that now in this case, if I refreshed, because this just gets, then it shows it's not active, and then there's more things I could do to it, right? If I needed to in the future, I wouldn't do it now unless something happened. You could delete it if you wanted, but what I'm going to do is show the alternative way. I think we can get in here if we instead of just clicking here, which we could do, let's see if we can just go into a new tab, and I'm going to paste that URL. And let's see. Yeah, so that's kind of a nice, oh, actually it goes back to here. Oh, it actually does it automatically, which is nice. I've never done it that way. So in a sense, I could just copy this URL that I would need, okay? All right, so this is your first code space that you have for your private repo. It's getting spun up. We've made a change to it. And just while this is spinning up, I'm going to go back and show you that the next part of what you're going to do And I just want to be clear about this. Though only those doing local need to do these steps, and that's done in the terminal. But for everybody, what you're going to learn about is this process, right? So this is for both local and code spaces. And this is really how we then make changes to our, in your case, code space in order to have those changes show up. Now it's taking it a minute here just to spin up. So it's taking more than normal, maybe because of the way I closed it, right? So just to look at this while it's still spinning up. So these are commands that you will do in the terminal. As a matter of fact, the changes that I just did, you're going to want to just, and again, walk through this video to show how to do that. Remember, when I've done these videos, because they were done in last, oh, actually it's fall 23, I didn't have code spaces as an option, and I do have that now. Yeah, it's taking, I wonder if that's why. Actually, it may just be taking a little longer for whatever reason. So I think what we'll do here is, now that you've gotten that code space set up, here's what I recommend doing. Once that spins up is actually now, because you should also have a public repo, and then you will have two code spaces. You will have your private code space, this one, right? And then you will want to go through this same process that I just did for your public one, so both are ready to go. All right, so we'll pick this up at the next one and show you about how to then do version control on your code space, or on your code for changes you've done to your code space to push to GitHub so that you can turn it in. All right, talk to you later.